When discussing the selection of keynotes for this year's conference, we wanted to invite a speaker who could bring a kind of diverse perspective to accessibility in terms of its practical contribution to improving everyday life and how it can better be embraced by organizations. I am glad to say that we were able to find a keynote speaker that fits this description perfectly. It is my pleasure and honor to announce that our next keynote speaker will be Robin Christopherson, one of the most knowledgeable and inspirational experts in this field. Robin is a founding member of the UK tech charity AbleNet, where he currently serves as head of digital inclusion. The charity specializes in advising individuals on technology to help them at home, in education, and at workplace, and helping companies designing attractive websites, software, and apps without compromising accessibility and ease of use for all. Robin has been a leading expert on accessibility and digital inclusion for over 2 decades. And he has been a regular speaker raising awareness of the power and potential of technology to transform people's lives. His work was recognized, among others, with the award of an NBME in the 2017 Queen's New Year's Honor List for services to digital inclusion. He was also recently awarded the honorary doctorate from the University of Suffolk Department of Computer Science. Robin is a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Disability and Assistive Technology and was included in the Power 100 list of UK's most influential people with disabilities last year. He was featured in the UN's World's Top 100 Most Influential People in Digital Government, voted by more than 500 organizations, including governments and global NGOs. Today, Robin will talk about the mental 180 degrees turn that we will all need to undergo when it comes to considering accessibility in our complex hybrid working environment, as well as exploring a more mature approach to embedding accessibility within every aspect of our organization. So I thank Robin again, and we can start with the keynote. Thank you.
Hello there, I am Robin Christopherson. I'm Head of Digital Inclusion of UK Technology and Disability charity AbilityNet. Today we're going to be talking about out with accessibility, in with inclusive design. Why out with accessibility? Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. On the next slide here, you can see an old-fashioned computer, and we're going to start with the first age of computing. We're going to cover 3 ages of computing, guys. The first age of computing is the advent of the PC back in the 80s, when it became common for people to have devices like this, a number of items. You've got the main computer. They don't really look like those towers anymore, do they? You've got a computer monitor of some shape. You've got a keyboard and a mouse. Now, why am I showing you this? Well, it's to show the empowering potential of technology for everyone. It's changed the world, hasn't it? But for people with disabilities, then it was an absolute game changer, because if you can't use a pen and paper, for example, or a conventional typewriter, say, for myself, I'm blind. So, you know, both of those were out for me. But because you can adapt the computer, its flexibility, it really opens doors and levels the playing field for people with disabilities. So if you can't see the text on the screen, you can make it bigger, you can change the colors, you can get a larger monitor, for example. With the keyboard, there are loads of different kinds of keyboards, from ergonomic, small, large. You could fit a plastic guard over the keyboard so you can poke your fingers through the holes. So if you have motor difficulties, you can rest the weight of your arms on that key guard and just press through the holes, etc. If you can't use a normal keyboard, then you could use voice recognition. There's an on-screen keyboard. Ditto with the mouse. So many different options. Make the mouse pointer bigger, get a more ergonomic mouse, etc., etc. So this is the power of technology. And yes, technology has got both good and bad aspects, but I'm so lucky to be working for an organization where the real power, the benefit of technology is so clear in our day-to-day work with people with a range of impairments. If we go on to the next slide, So we're talking about the next age of computing, which is the age of small screens. So the age of mobile, sort of early noughties, and certainly with the advent of the iPhone in I think it was 2007 that it came out, everything's changed. Mobile is now more important, certainly, or arguably, than computers. Certainly, any given website, Google says over 60% of traffic on any given day is from a mobile device. So we're absolutely living in a mobile first world, which made designers, developers impose a lot more discipline on what they were doing. They suddenly don't have a great big canvas to cram full of different controls and visual elements, etc. They're having to reduce it right down, reduce the number of controls, simplify the UI, and that's made it easier for everyone, including people with disabilities. Yes, there is a challenge with the smaller screen, and here we've got a lady who may or may not have a vision impairment, but certainly I'm sure we can all relate to, well, those of us with vision, to being able to see clearly what's on your mobile phone screen on a sunny day, small sheet of shiny glass, etc. And for those moments, whether or not you've got a visual impairment, the considerations that someone with a visual impairment needs, good color contrast, decent default font size, etc., are applicable to you as well for those moments. And this idea of situational impairment, Microsoft are a great champion for, but we've actually been talking about it for a lot longer than that. So the idea of accessibility just being for disabled people is really outdated now, and we need to think beyond that to making those products, services inclusive for everybody who are extreme computing. They're computing on the edge because of this mobile first environment. If we go on to the next slide, I was looking for a picture of someone with great big jumbo sausage fingers, but I couldn't find one. So just pretend that this person's got great big mutant fingers. Now, phones have been getting bigger over the years, but they've also been getting smaller. And, there are both extremes, and, not everyone's using massive phablet phones. And for the people who are using a smaller screen, the ability to be able to tap things accurately and not get the wrong one because they're all crammed in close together, those sort of basic UI considerations are absolutely covered in the accessibility guidelines for people with a motor or dexterity impairment. For any developers out there, 44 by 44 px is the smallest tappable area according to the web accessibility guidelines, and it absolutely applies here too. You really need to have good default tappable areas and not too close together, so separated with enough white space so that people don't hit the wrong one. And that will help people with a motor or dexterity difficulty, whether they're using their mouse and trying to accurately click on something on a desktop, or whether they're using their fingers in mobile. On the next screen, we've got someone who's got a cup of coffee in one hand and their phone in the other. And, we do this all the time. I bet every single one of us today has already been using our phone one-handed several times because, we use our mobile phones an awful lot and we haven't always got two hands free, or maybe we're just using it with one hand because. So again, the accessibility requirements that are enshrined very clearly in the guidelines for both desktop and mobile, for web and for mobile development, are very clear about making sure that people with fine motor control difficulties can access them correctly, just like we saw on the last slide. But it works for these people too. If you're using your phone one-handed, just holding it and using your thumb makes you much less accurate. Now, he could have been in a coffee queue, for example. He could be on his coffee break, and with all getting back to IRL in real life events now and going back to the office, etc. So he could have been sociable and talking to somebody else in the coffee queue. And so he's only got a few seconds left. He's got his coffee. He's quickly having to do something before he has to go back to his desk. And that extreme usability to be able to do that quickly before he has to, runs out of time, whether you're, running out of a coffee break time or you're on the escalator and you want to quickly do something before you get to the top, etc. There are so many instances where you need to be able to efficiently do something. That will make for extremely usable UI. Again, enshrined in the accessibility guidelines, which will improve that for everyone. So if you've got a challenge with complex UIs or in unintuitive user interfaces, then making them simple will also help people who are time constrained, for example. And if that wasn't coffee, if that was alcohol, Uber must have extreme UX, usability, for people who have had a good night out and they still want to be able to order an Uber successfully to be able to get home, etc. So I could go on and on. What am I saying? I'm not saying that accessibility isn't important anymore. In fact, the guidelines are there and that's at the heart of what we're talking about. But don't think of accessibility just being for disabled people. That's the mistake. It totally isn't these days. It's for everybody. It will just make good products and services that will be better for everyone, regardless of their experience using devices or the internet, etc., or how, what their environment is and how kind of extreme they are in their computing on the edge in any given moment. And we all slide up and down that spectrum of impairment almost minute by minute when it comes to mobile. So if we move on. So this blurring of who is accessibility for is really, really key, because, we're not thinking about people with disabilities only benefiting from it. So it's not this niche consideration, which, is a bolt-on activity. And if it's bolted on, when push comes to shove, it could easily be dropped off as well. We're talking about building it in from the start. But that's not to say that disabled people aren't massive, avid tech fans. They absolutely are. What we're going to look at here is a mainstream device, i.e. my iPhone, and an app that I use almost every day. It's a specialist app on a mainstream platform, leveraging mainstream sensors, the camera, the neural network processor within the system on a chip within the iPhone. And we'll take a look at this, and then afterwards I'll say a little bit more about it.
Seeing AI is a Microsoft research project for people with visual impairments. The app narrates the world around you by turning the visual world into an audible experience. Point your phone's camera, select a channel, and hear a description. The app recognizes saved friends.
Jenny near top right, 3 feet away.
Describes the people around you, including their emotions.
28-year-old female wearing glasses looking happy.
It reads text out loud as it comes into view, like on an envelope.
Ken Lawrence, P.O. Box.
Or a room entrance.
Conference 2005.
Or scan and read documents like books and letters. The app will guide you and recognize the text with its formatting.
Top and left edge is not visible. Hold steady. Lease agreement. This agreement
When paying with cash, the app identifies currency bills.
$20 US.
When looking for something in your pantry or at the store, use the barcode scanner with audio cues to help you find what you want.
Campbell's tomato soup.
When available, hear additional product details.
Heated microwave bowl on high.
And even hear descriptions of images in other apps like Twitter by importing them into Seeing AI.
A close-up of Bill Gates.
Finally, explore our experimental features like scene descriptions to get a glimpse of the future.
I think it's a young girl throwing a frisbee in the park.
Experience the world around you with the Seeing AI app from Microsoft.
Fantastic. I'm not sure why it said Conference 2005 on that sign, because, certainly the app wasn't around in 2005. But anyway, very accurate. I use all of those features regularly. It's an absolute game changer. Of course, all of those abilities, whether it's OCR, optical character recognition, image processing, light detection, all of those things are mainstream technologies. They are being leveraged by everyone on their smartphones or in their, working lives very regularly. But there is this massive overlap, just like with accessibility, when it comes to everyday usage. So technology is really being leveraged by everyone, but is an absolute game changer when it comes to people with disabilities. On the next slide, we've got this lovely infographic sculpt. So for those of you who are relatively new to accessibility and you want a mnemonic, a handy way of remembering the basics of accessibility, because accessibility is for everyone who, from people who create Word documents or send an email right through to developers, designers, copywriters, etc. So the basics here, they don't directly compare to, say, the WCAG principles, etc., but it's a really handy way of remembering it. This is from Helen Wilson, brilliant lady at the Worcestershire County Council, and she's given us permission to reuse this. So SCULPT stands for structure, use proper headings, etc. I'm sure you guys all know about this. 1H1, logical children under that of H2, separating the different basic sections of the page. Children under that would be H3, etc. Google will absolutely love you for that. They'll give you lots of SEO optimization, search engine optimization brownie points for that, and that's been as true now as it ever has been. Then we've got color, use of color and contrast. 1 in 5 males have a color deficit condition, have difficulty telling between red, green, or blue, yellow, etc. And make sure their color contrast, the color contrast is really good, particularly on smaller sized fonts, because of that small sheet of shiny glass for every single user, etc. And particularly in infographics and charts and things, make sure that, you know, if you're using color, then you have a key, they're properly contrasting, and ideally you would add textures to the different colors so that people can further differentiate, etc. Then you've got U, which is use of graphics. It's really important that graphics are added to help with the visual appeal, to provide more information, and to reinforce what's going on in the text for people with literacy difficulties or learning difficulties, etc. But make sure that you properly provide alternative text descriptions, and if it's a long image like this, then the description should fully explain what's in the image. Then you've got links, and links are really important. If you're going to put a link within a sentence, make sure that when that underlined text, that linkified text, is pulled up out of context, that it still makes sense. So for me as a blind person, you know, if I've got click here and read more pulled up into the list that I can then move down through to be able to hit enter and easily find a link on a website, for example, then that's not going to be helpful for me. So make sure that it starts with the proper string. So if it's an annual report, don't say click here, the underlined bit, for our annual report. Just make annual report the bit that's underlined, etc. Then we've got plain English. Plain English is about use of language. Please use simple language if you can. A good old Anglo-Saxon word, as it's called over here, rather than something with a Latin or Greek origin, will be much more legible or readable for people with lower literacy ages. And I think they say the average literacy age here in the UK is 9. So yeah, that kind of puts it in some sort of context. And then we've got tables. Please don't use tables to present information in a, you know, for presentational purposes. Please limit it to data tables and make sure that they're not complex. They're relatively straightforward without lots of cells spanning rows and columns, etc. So if we move on to the next slide, let's go to the third age of computing. So we had the PC, then we had mobile, and now we're talking about the age of ambient computing. I actually host a daily podcast called Dot to Dot, all about the Echo. I'm not going to say her name because there's one right here. And we're up to episode 1910 at the time of recording, and we've never missed a day, and we're still not scratching the surface of what you can do with your Echo. So we're definitely in the age of the smart speaker. And talk about adding discipline and simplifying the UI when it came from desktop to mobile. Smart speakers are that times 1,000. Obviously, you can just speak to the air, and hopefully 9 times out of 10 you will get some useful response or functionality. I use it all the time. Now, however simple it is, I'm going to show you a video now of an argument to say that, you know, in the future, ideally it would be even simpler and even smarter than it is today. Apologies if anyone finds this video a little bit distasteful. Hopefully you won't. I think it's really quite funny, and it's got a very important point that we'll talk about afterwards. Okay then, so yeah, apologies if people felt that was a little bit off colour. Really interesting how much, I mean, the Echo, the Google Home, or Nest as it's called now, and the HomePod with Siri, to name a few, are getting better and smarter all the time, and a lot of things that you saw there are actually more or less achievable today, but we've taken that to a new level with the smarts of the A-Lady there, and you know, that is only going to help people to stay connected, to be able to get information that they need, get important reminders, and be able to be contacted and supported by friends and carers, etc. For older people for whom even a smartphone, well, I say even, for whom other technologies are going to be far too complex, to be able to just talk to the air and get really important, often life-changing support or information or services is an absolute game changer. And all the guidelines that we were talking about, okay, this is just a voice only platform in the majority, although there are ones with screens. There are guidelines to cover speech first UIs as well. So if we move on to the next slide, Slight gear change here. We're going to talk about our Digital Accessibility Maturity Model, our DAM, and we often have been working with organizations who come to us again and again to help audit their websites, to provide training, consultancy, etc. And in the meantime, we haven't, there's been no growth of the skill sets, the capabilities, the support, the requirements within an organization so that they can do it themselves. Being a charity, our ultimate goal is to make ourselves redundant because everybody's doing what they need to do and they have expertise built in. And that's exactly what this was developed to address. So it's a really powerful but very simple process, and it will explore all areas of accessibility for digital services and products for both internal use and externally facing, that to make sure that things are as they should be, so that you've embedded best practice within everything that you do. So you're not firefighting, you don't have any nasty surprises. The amount of resources is minimized because you're doing everything at the right stage, i.e. right from the beginning, you're building in inclusive design principles in everything that you do. We're going to look at the 5 dimensions in a moment, but they will, the process gives you very clear, manageable next steps so that you can level up across these different dimensions and, get a roadmap, a very realistic roadmap to a higher level of maturity. And there is a downloadable toolkit, which is free. If you just go to the AbilityNet website and search for DAM, or just, Google AbilityNet and DAM, then you will get that as well. If we move on to the next slide. So this is what the matrix, as we call it, looks like. So there are 5 levels from informal through to defining the different areas clearly. So level 1 is definitely ad hoc. Level 2 is kind of, okay, we kind of know what we're doing, but we haven't really addressed it across the whole organization. Right up to level 5, which is, you're doing things in an optimal way across everything that you do. Different dimensions: vision, leadership, processes, capability, procurement. So these are the different aspects that we're going to be looking at in that process, which you can either self-serve with that downloadable pack, or which AbilityNet can walk through with you and kind of help you go through that process and get the most out of that process. If we move on to the next slide. So apologies for the size of text on this slide. I really do apologize, but this is just the success criteria, as we call them, in the matrix for capability, for example. So when it comes to capability, level 1, things aren't really in place. There's no accessibility requirements mentioned in the relevant job descriptions. No real training or resources have been applied, etc. So there's not really any sharing of resources, and so things are all very informal and ad hoc and patchy. That's actually where most of the organizations that we do this process with find themselves. Level 1 and level 2 are mostly where organizations have landed at the end of this process, but it doesn't matter. Everyone's on the journey, and there are very clear steps for actioning immediately, action now, and then slightly lower priority to action later to level you up even further. So level 2 defined. You've started to get the accessibility requirements being defined in key job descriptions, etc., etc. I could go on, but have a read of those for yourselves. Download the pack. All of the success criteria across the different dimensions are all highlighted there, along with lots of other resources to help you self-serve the process if you want to, or just get in touch with us and we can talk about helping you with the managed process where all the relevant stakeholders are brought along with the process. If we go on to the next slide. So I'm going to have another swift gear change here. So you've embedded accessibility within your organization, hopefully, or you're on that journey. We're all on a journey, guys, as I'm sure everyone who's familiar with accessibility knows. It's not a destination, it's a journey. But if you've got the right tools, resources, support, policies in place, then you're in a much better position to be able to make it part of your day job. And if you've got to grips with the basics of accessibility or inclusive design, you're in a much better place to look forward for when the next age of computing comes along. Now that might be, for example, the age of ubiquitous screens, where every single surface is potentially a screen for you to deliver content on, or maybe the surface of your glass lenses, spectacles, the lenses in your spectacles might be the surface to deliver content. So let's watch a quick video here. Again, apologies if this is a bit flippant, but this is an actual bus stop, a real life bus stop in London. And as you'll see at the end, this is a Pepsi advert, but as I say, this is a real life bus stop. So I'll explain afterwards why on earth I've included this video.
Let me flip this script. I feel privileged for all who can witness this. I am close to divine. Though the moment is mine, the moment of sign. I sprint. To all the squares that ask around, be in it. My skills pay me. I'm trying to get a million, baby, with an adopted flow that God gave me. Me now. Tell whoever runners that they spot is temporary till I think I got that one. Tell Miss I'm on my wealth tip. So when we cash out soon, I'm just investing.
I'm telling you, this is how it works, man. There's a little camera right here.
Okay, so they're using AR in this case to freak people out who are, standing at a bus stop, with the ultimate goal of aim of selling Pepsi, of course. But there are less flippant uses of AR. AR is obviously a thing already. There are lots of AR headsets, there are AR apps on your phone. Pokemon is still as popular as ever, but there are lots of really practical uses of AR. And there are accessibility guidelines for AR, VR and XR, just as there are for web and mobile and desktop and smart speakers, etc. So if you are looking at, making sure your organization is familiar with the different platforms' requirements, then you will be in the mindset of accessibility and of inclusive design. And it will be a natural consequence of that when a new platform comes along, it could be, AR with transparent screens serving content all the time, where you don't have control over the background of what you're delivering, unlike, on a normal screen where you can control that solid color usually. And, people might be walking past. It might be a much quicker interaction. There might be a completely different set of kind of interactions with the users, and those considerations really need to be factored in. But if people are aware of the basics in the platforms that are already out there, then you'll be better placed to deal with and create more inclusive products, regardless of what the next thing might be. Maybe it's autonomous vehicles, maybe it's flying taxis where, it's going to be really noisy, it's going to be full of vibration, people are going to be really impaired when they're using their devices, which obviously they will be, because on any journey of any length, people will want to be using their phones. YouTube have said that on their videos, of all the videos that are played on YouTube, 60% of them have captions turned on. Now that's not just people with a hearing impairment, obviously, is it? That's people in a noisy cafe, or maybe in their lectures, in university lectures, where they haven't got the sound on and they're supposed to be listening to the lecturer, but they actually are watching YouTube videos with captions, with subtitles. So yeah, the overlap, as we've heard, is, never ending. So that's why accessibility is definitely not just going to help disabled people, but arguably it's going to help us more, because this is the only way that we're able to interact with these services often. So it's going to be a game changer for us, but it's going to make them better for everyone. If we move on to the next slide. So what have we got here? Well, this looks like the normal kind of capture challenge. It could be a number of things, a garbled image, code on the screen. It could be a range of images with, which of these have got traffic signs in and half of them are covered up by trees, etc. Now, talking about AI, this is an arms race. The optical character recognition, the image recognition is trying to thwart the people who are trying to tell whether you're a robot or not. Now, there is that tick box that Google have, but tabbing to that checkbox instead of moving it to it with a mouse driven by a human hand, often, which I do as a keyboard only user, often means that I am detected as a robot. So that's not good either. So there are lots of reasons why capture challenges are evil and shouldn't be used unless absolutely necessary, because they are an inconvenience for you guys, but they are a massive challenge for us. And we've got a bit of interaction here. If you've got some way of jotting this down, I'd really appreciate it if you did, particularly if you've got colleagues watching this as well around you, and you can then compare notes afterwards. Let's listen to this. This is what I would have to deal with as a blind person who clicks the audio capture image, which is usually a wheelchair symbol, by the way, which is like a slightly odd choice for an audio capture for a blind person. But anyway, let's listen to this. It's short, it's repeated twice, so you'll get 2 bites at the cherry.
9, 3, 7, 9, 7, 0, once again. 9, 3, 7, 9, 7,
I'm sure I heard some meows in there. Okay, now on one level that's kind of funny, but if you think about what this implies for people with a disability, they have to finish this process. It's for signing up for, an important service. It's to complete a purchase. It's maybe to sign up for getting their groceries delivered online because that's the only way they can get food. This is important stuff. So, and that's what we're faced with. I've done this presentation to a room of 1,800, and I asked them to all write down on a piece of paper or on their phone what the code they thought they heard was. And then I asked them to compare with the people who are sitting around them, which is a good half dozen people, isn't it, when you're, in an audience, and see if anyone got the same code as their neighbours. And in a room of 1,800, nobody was able to put their hand up and say that they even got the same code as anyone next to them. And, if somebody had, if 2 people had put their hand up, who's to say that the code that they got was even the right one? So this is the problem that we're facing here, and this is inaccessibility or exclusive design made flesh. This is a real life practical example, and if you take this level of dismay and frustration and you times that by several dozen, if not even more than that, times a day, when people with a range of disabilities bump up against inaccessibility, and it's enough to make you weep. It really is. And you're also obviously going to be disadvantaging people with your exclusive design, your design that is excluding people from that, who have those situational impairments that we talked about before. This is massive. This is absolutely massive. If we move on to the next slide, so just to sort of finish off, a shameless plug for our training. And our training is a really important part of helping embedding accessibility within your organization. There are loads of training resources online. It doesn't have to be with us, but if you wanted to, we offer a really wide range of training from, a series of 10 training sessions with everything from, content providers to editors, website managers, coders, etc., designers, right through to, say, PDF accessibility, a range of different training for every single role within an organization, and a lot of it is free. But if you want to go for one of our paid ones where we can do it, for example, to deliver to your organization specifically, then if you use the AbilityNet Event 10 code, then you get 10% off. So AbilityNet Event 10 all squished together will access that as well. So please do go to abilitynet.org.uk/training if you want to get more information there, or just search for AbilityNet training in Google or DuckDuckGo or whatever it is that you use. So yeah, shameless plug over. Thank you very much indeed for listening. I hope you found this informative. If you take one thing away, it should be the impossibility of that capture challenge that we looked at a moment ago. That embodies what inaccessibility is all about. And you know, you want to be part of a more accessible future for every single user across all the platforms that they use today and tomorrow. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's just move on to the last slide, Q&A.
Okay, thank you, Robin. So this was definitely a very interesting talk. Let's start, as the last slide mentioned, Q&A. So I'm going to check if there are any questions in the chat. Okay, maybe I can start with a few icebreaker questions. So the first one is actually a comment. Just to give a bit feedback on the captcha problem that you mentioned, I remember a couple of years ago that I was working at University of Turin at that time, and we had a collaboration with an Italian organization that was distributing and making tests for university entrance for students, and they were asking our department, our group, our research group, how to make them more accessible. And one of the main problems on which we kind of clashed was essentially the accessibility of math formula within the questionnaires. The math formula were provided as images, and all the questions were provided as images, as an attempt to make it difficult to copy the text of the questions. And of course, one of our first comments were, let's make this a text so that a screen reader can read it and make it accessible. And on this, we clashed a lot. Essentially, they're hiding the textual nature of this content as an image was an attempt to make it more secure for their keeping the content exclusive, but it actually was causing a huge exclusion on the part of accessibility for everyone. So I understand perfectly what you're saying when you're mentioning captions.
Totally,
the captchas.
Yeah, and obviously there is a legal requirement both in the UK and in the EU. You know, that is in clear breach of. So, but we absolutely understand that there is this conflict sometimes between accessibility and security, and you know, the capture process is a really good example of that. But in case anyone's wondering if there's a inherent conflict between good design and accessibility, no. In fact, the two are pushing in the same direction, as hopefully I've kind of indicated in that presentation. You know, inclusive design is just good design. So you're really going to be helping everyone. It's going to be improving usability for everyone. The RNIB, the Royal National Institute for the Blind here in the UK, did some really interesting research a few years ago. They got some websites and they tested them with people with a vision impairment or no vision at all. And because it was a good research methodology, they also had a control group of able-bodied testers with no vision impairment. And of the sites that were at least single A compliant, so that's the minimum threshold, obviously they were easier to use by people with a vision impairment. But the really interesting finding was that the control group found those sites much easier to use as well. And in fact, on average, the able-bodied testers were able to perform the tasks given on average 35% more quickly, in sites that even met just single A compliance. So, there's a definite push in the same direction when it comes to just good design. Sites can still be sexy. They can still be, cutting edge from a design, showing the latest kind of design principles and stuff. Thankfully, we've moved away when it comes to web from, dancing GIFs and scrolling text and Flash and all that sort of thing. But still, we're in an age of web applications where, it can be really, really challenging, where things are, theoretically compliant. I'm thinking of Teams, Microsoft Teams, for example, which is a very complicated web app, even, in the desktop. But it's a real challenge. So I can use everything in Teams, but I find it really, really challenging from a usability point of view. So there's also this kind of gap between technical compliance and real life usability, and getting end users involved who have lived experiences really helps bridge that gap. And it's in that gap that you see real improvements in mainstream usability as well. So yeah, this is not, I wouldn't say a silver bullet, but it's definitely a really good recipe for improving your products for every single user. I think that message has come across, hasn't it, in my presentation?
Definitely. So there are a few questions in chat. The first one is from Adam Chabarik, asking, what are your thoughts on Google reCAPTCHA version 3?
Yeah, I mean, I showed one that is pretty hairy, pretty awful, didn't I? That audio capture, which I probably should have said in the presentation in case anyone was expecting it to just, say out what was visually in that code on the screen. No, that would have been far too simple. Yeah, that's definitely a relatively poor example, but not everyone's using reCAPTCHA. That's a lot clearer when it comes to the audio version and the visuals as well. So yeah, and I'm not a robot often works, but not always. So it's a mixed bag, but I have been challenged and defeated by CAPTCHA so many times. I really wish that despite how good machine learning is, it's not actually brilliant at correctly answering questions that are as simple as which of these are not fruit. And this is in straight text, HTML, and then it lists some items. So if you go to textcapture.com, I think last time I looked, it was still going. It has a free API of up to, I think, 2,000 calls a day. So unless you've got a very heavily trafficked site, you don't even have to pay for the service. And that serves up these logic questions. I know that there are challenges for people with a learning difficulty, for example, perhaps in being able to answer which of these things is, a job and which aren't. But I would probably argue that if people have that level of learning difficulty, they may not be surfing solo anyway. They're probably going to have support because they would be challenged with a lot of other things as well. So textcapture.com, I would probably point people at if you need to have a challenge to try and limit, some of the bot accounts that would otherwise be, scraped through.
Thank you, Robin. Another question is, we have recently had customers ask us to convert URLs to text. For example, instead of www.amazon.com, make it just amazon.com. However, this content is also going to be in print, and sighted users need to see the actual URLs to access. Do you have thoughts on how to improve the experience for those with visual impairments while retaining access for sighted users in hard copy?
I mean, if it's something that needs to be accessed visually, then if you can shorten the link, and a case of Amazon, for example, Bitly will give you an Amazon friendly shortened version, it does it for notable top level domains. That would be really good and that would help everyone. But as far as stripping out the HTTP or the www, I think that's quite far down the sort of priority list or challenge list of people with impairments, because if you're having to transpose that, type it out manually from seeing it here, maybe on paper, for example, to typing it in, then I think a shortened URL would be beneficial. I'm sure people will have got used to having to type http:// at least, and then you can go straight into the shortened URL. So yeah, I mean, simplification is definitely a challenge, and I'm not, going to sort of oversimplify that, but that goes for content in general as well. So, you know, taking copy, if you've got some printed copy from a brochure or some original document, before you put that up on a web page, a desktop web page, you should cut that copy down by a third. That's the rule of thumb to make it consumable on screen. But then if you take that to mobile, you really have to add a lot more discipline there. Maybe have just a very concise summary and then a tap through to expand or to go to, you know, a bigger description on a second page or screen or whatever. So, you know, there's really there's a lot of discipline that needs to apply to these newer platforms, and that will actually help everyone.
Okay, so Ted Drake suggests a way to make the print style easier accessible by adding a snippet of code inside the chat. So if someone is interested, they can check there.
Dragan, this is Ted. I know it was confusing, but basically in the print style sheet, which is how you can define what your web page looks like when it goes to a printer, you can actually use a little simple CSS that grabs the href and puts it into the page right after the link. And that's what I was sharing. So it would only be displayed when it goes to the printer. It's not answering the initial question, but it was just something I was adding.
Simplifies a bit. So, well, yes, style sheets can adapt between print and screen and different screen formats. So that is definitely a way to tweak based on the medium.
Absolutely. And hi, Ted. I'm Ted's biggest fan. You need to get him on to present if you're not already in the event, sorry. But yeah, also you can use styles to do a lot to provide screen reader only content, for example. So for someone like myself, I could have a different version spoken out to me than that would otherwise, you know, present visually on the screen too. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much, Robin. Maybe let's see if there is some other question. Okay, so Donald is asking, first, Donald is commenting, really enjoyable presentation. I'm wondering how the opinions we've heard today relate to the principles of universal design. Thank you, Donald.
I wouldn't say I'm an expert on that because it's broader than the area that we've been touching upon, but I don't think there's any inherent conflict there. I think it's, you know, a subset of it and something that, if you know, it's a broader area to master, but the area that we're talking about here to improve the usability for everyone and actually gain access for people with, you know, more significant challenges is probably the biggest win that you could have in, you know, working towards something that is universally inclusive for everybody. So yeah. Just really quickly while I think about it, just going back to that video about the silver echo, people might have thought, well, you know, there's a lot of stuff in there that is totally out of, you know, it's decades away if they ever would implement something like that. And I just wanted to quickly flag that almost all of those are, like I said in the video, achievable today. You know, we shouldn't underestimate the power of the platform, particularly the connected home, the smart home. So if you've got an Echo with a screen, it's got a camera, I as a blind person can hold something up to the camera and it will, you know, find the barcode or it'll grab the text on the packet. So I could just say to the A lady, what am I holding? Or what's this? And she will scan it just like it scanned that, you know, where's the remote control? It's in your hand. And ditto, you know, the children playing across the street, you absolutely can have connected cameras, whether it's, you know, security cameras like the Blink cams that Amazon do, or their video ring doorbells. All of those can easily be leveraged by your Echo to, you know, see what's going on in the street, and then you would use the AI that we saw in Seeing AI earlier to be able to analyze the scene and that sort of thing. I'm not saying that that is as usable as we saw in the video, but all of this stuff is absolutely there. And the more we can be aware, or the better awareness that we have about the sheer power of, you know, smart devices and all of their connected, you know, the connected ecosystem, the more we'll be able to think outside the box when it comes to doing things inclusively. All right, I've got the building blocks now, I've got the basics down, just like Ted says, shift left, make it born accessible. And then, you know, you've got the building blocks for making really interesting projects going forward that leverage that and that can be used by everybody, but, you know, maybe would be life-changing for people with impairments as well.
Thank you, Robin. This last comment, however, introduces another particular problem about the privacy. For example, video cameras capturing different parts of your life and other people's life. Do you think that would be, let's say, acceptable for users with disabilities and for also other people who are essentially in some way captured by the sensors?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to minimize the potential risk there. I think when you've got a relatively constrained ecosystem like Amazon's ecosystem, or the, you know, the thought and consideration for security that's gone into Apple's Siri and, you know, other services, I think it minimizes it. But if you don't want any of your data to be sent, either your, you know, what you type in on your computer, the different places that you go on your computer, your voice, your image, you know, if you've got a smart speaker and you haven't turned off its ears or its eyes, then that ship has sailed a long time ago. So yeah, you just have, there has to be trust to a certain extent, and there will always be and have been examples where bad guys have breached that, you know, the walls of that particular system. So I don't want to minimize it, and we are talking about vulnerable people here, but these are the people that can benefit most from it. You know, if you've got that camera on all the time, then family, friends, loved ones can drop in on you and see how you're getting on, even if you can't remember what the command is to contact them. And the motion sensors within those can detect when you've fallen, or when there's broken glass, or when there's running water. All of these things can be leveraged to improve the security of people. So maybe, you know, you're giving away security in one hand and then you're improving it in another way. So yeah, technology, like I said right at the beginning, is a double-edged sword, and we're just very lucky to be able to focus more on its empowering potential, but we totally understand that. And a lot of great minds are thinking about how to, you know, improve the security, and, you know, when people have compromised their security, and there's a lot of great minds working against that as well for ill. So yeah, it's an ongoing challenge.
Thank you, Robin. So we have another question from Emmanuel. Text capture is English only capture. Is there a way to use it in French?
I'm afraid I don't know. Sorry. I don't know of any other sites that are equivalent. So if it doesn't offer multilingual support, then I can't help, I'm afraid.
A bit more a global question for me this time. So while you were showing the video for Seeing AI, there was this conference 2005 reading, and you interpreted it as it was 2005 in the sense of year, but actually that was the label for a door saying this is a conference room 2005,
right.
which shows one thing that I often encountered during my research in assistive technologies. That is, the assistive technologies often need a strong context information in order to do their job properly. And people with disabilities often need to have also context about what's happening in order to interpret what assistive technology is doing and if it's doing it properly. So do you have any idea of how much this is of a problem and how to address it from your side?
Yeah, I mean, context is all important. Context is king. And we're at the very early stages of AI or machine learning being able to pull out anything than just the basic elements, or, you know, building blocks of an image, for example, to know what it is. So, you know, it will just grab the text, and often the synthesizer might even mangle that. So, you know, on my phone, where the calendar app is on my iPhone, my speech says something like calendar 25th, well, 25 April the 2nd notifications. And it's the 25th of April, but it says April the 2nd notifications because after that there's 2 notifications. So it's 25 April 2. So it says the 2nd of April because that's kind of what it's trying to be clever and process the string that way. So we're way off, you know, a layer of AI being applied to everything to do a sort of sanity check before it's provided to the end user to say, does this actually convey, you know, it needs to have an understanding of what's going on. It's a bit like however good the speech synthesizer is and the new cloud voices in Microsoft Edge, you know, just go into Immersive Reader, which simplifies the page for everyone, and then just click on the play button and you will hear amazing, startlingly human sounding voices. But you could never use that to read an audiobook or to read the news because they don't have any idea what they're reading. They're just passing text and, you know, trying to pronounce it right and doing some clever things like that April the 2nd, which sometimes backfires. So, you know, until they actually understand what they're reading out, they'll never be able to replace a proper voice actor reading an audiobook, you know, recording an audiobook, for example. So yeah, context is all important. If you've got a group of people in an image, for example, the context might be that, you know, hey, look, all of these people are white. There's no black people in this. And the story is about how, you know, there's no racial diversity in a particular organization or a committee or whatever it might be. But for us, we'd just get a group of people. It wouldn't say anything about colors of skin or whatever. Maybe the people who are creating the AI that interpret the image for us don't want to go there with regards to skin colors or whatever, but that might be the important bit. So, you know, we're a long way off from AI really understanding the context, and that's got so much about social norms, about memes, about you know, historical context and stuff like that. So we're going to be a long way off.
Thank you very much for all this insight, Robin. Okay, so that's it. This was Robin Christopherson, which we thank really a lot. And this is also the last session of today. So just a few quick announcements for tomorrow, and then we can close the session for today. So tomorrow morning, as we were saying this morning, there will be the initial first session with sponsor announcements. So we will be starting at 10:15. I remind you that we will be starting at 10:15. Please vote for the Accessibility Challenge Delegates Award on Slack and also here on Whova. We have in the Accessibility Challenge session the link and the videos. And yeah, I hope you are having fun. I hope you like the conference as much as I do. And so, yeah, unless there are any other comments from program chairs or other organizers, I think we can close it here. Okay, then this is it. Thank you very much. Thank you for the awesome day, and see you tomorrow.